what is going to be the temperature during God's wrath? What will the temperature be during God's wrath? Well, notice what it says in verse number 2. And he opened the bottomless pit, and so he opens up hell, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace. And the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. Notice how it says the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. Now, this point, I cannot prove to you 100%. But I'm just going to go off a few different places when it talks about the wrath of God, because obviously a lot of things are going on, hail, fire, and all these different things. I personally believe it's going to be very cold during the wrath of God. And I'll give you a few reasons why. One of them is found in this verse. The sun and the air were darkened. The sun and the air were darkened, which means the sun is not heating the earth. Okay? If there's a lot of smoke, the sun is not going to have the capacity to heat the earth. Now, I want to read you something from when Mount Pinatubo took place. Obviously, Mount Pinatubo is the big volcano that happened here in the Philippines. And at first glance, you might think Mount Pinatubo increased the temperature of the earth. It did the exact opposite. It dropped the temperature of the earth for a long period of time. And here, I'm not an expert at this stuff, so I'll just explain why, according to this. Therefore, a heavy influx of aerosol pollutants, like the plume from Mount Pinatubo, will remain in the stratosphere for years until the processes of chemical reactions and atmospheric circulation can filter them out. In the case of Mount Pinatubo, the result was a measurable cooling of the Earth's surface for a period of almost 2 years. So for 2 years, the temperature on all of Earth was less. Okay, this is a side effect often from volcanoes. Okay, and then it says this: because they scatter and absorb incoming sunlight, aerosol particles exert a cooling effect on the Earth's surface. The Pinatubo eruption increased aerosol optical depth in the stratosphere by a factor of 10 to 100 times normal levels measured prior to the eruption. Aerosol optical depth is a measure of how much light airborne particles prevent from passing through a column of atmosphere. Consequently, over the next 15 months, scientists measured a drop in the average global temperature, so not just in the Philippines, worldwide global temperature of about 1 degree Fahrenheit or 0.6 degrees Celsius. So the temperature cooled off worldwide by about 1 degree Fahrenheit for 15 months. As a result of all the smoke that was in the air, the sun was just not able to heat the earth, okay? There's also something called a volcanic winter. Who's heard of a volcanic winter? Any scientists in here? I'm a math guy, so most of this stuff's new to me as well. I find this stuff interesting. I've watched a lot of things on volcanoes because that is pretty much hell, right? A lake of fire. So I've always found documentaries and things on volcanoes interesting. But this is what it says. A volcanic winter is a reduction in global temperatures caused by volcanic ash and droplets of sulfuric acid and water obscuring the sun and raising Earth's albedo, increasing the reflection of solar radiation. After a large, particularly explosive volcanic eruption, long-term cooling effects are primarily dependent upon injection of sulfur gases into the stratosphere, where they undergo a series of reactions to create sulfuric acid, which can nucleate and form aerosols. Volcanic stratospheric aerosols cool the surface by reflecting solar radiation and warm the stratosphere by absorbing terrestrial radiation. The variations in atmospheric warming and cooling result in changes in tropospheric and stratospheric circulation, okay? Now look, I'm not saying I understand every single word of that, but what I am saying is a lot of smoke will block the sun from heating the earth. That's a simple way, and that makes sense in my head when you really think about it. Because at first glance, if you think of a volcano erupting, you're going to think, oh man, it's going to heat up the earth. But look, the reason why the earth is actually habitable, that we can live here, is because the sun heats it. And if the sun's not going to be able to heat the earth, it's going to make the temperature drop, right? And so in 1991, eruption of Mount Pinatubo, a stratovolcano in the Philippines, cooled global temperatures for about 2 to 3 years. The 1883 explosion of Krakatoa may have contributed to volcanic winter-like conditions. The 4 years following the explosion were unusually cold, and the winter of 1887-1888 included powerful blizzards. Record snowfalls were recorded worldwide. However, the period of cold winters started with the 1882-1883 winter, months before the Krakatoa eruption. Now go back to Revelation 8. I'll show you another verse. Why I believe that the temperature is going to actually be cold. So there's scientific evidence when the sun's not able to heat the earth, it's going to drop the temperature. And look, when it comes to the end times, I'm admitting that with everything going on, I cannot guarantee it's going to drop because there's more than one factor happening with God's wrath being poured out. It's kind of hard to picture. But I'm just saying if I just read this and just think of it literally like this would happen today with nothing else happening, this is probably going to drop the temperature of the earth. Okay? Revelation chapter 8 verse 12. Revelation 8 verse 12. And the fourth angel sounded, and the third part of the sun was smitten, and the third part of the moon, and the third part of the stars, so as the third part of them was darkened, and the day shone not for a third part of it, and the night likewise. So the sun is darkened, and that means it's not going to be heating the earth, okay, for a third part of the day, which is 12 hours. So from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., there's a 4-hour time block where the sun's not going to be heating the earth. Now, my personal opinion is that it's completely dark for a third of the day, and I don't think it just moves immediately to full light. I think it's kind of a transition. I could be wrong because they're just kind of giving general numbers, a third part of the day. But look, if the sun is not going to be able to heat the earth, it's going to make it cold. Now, here in the Philippines, you're thinking, that's great. It's like, I'd love to have cold weather. It's so hot. Let me tell you, that would be so much worse than warm weather. I mean, cold weather is miserable. I would much rather, and this is my opinion, be 40 degrees than 0 degrees, okay? I would much rather 40 degrees Celsius than 0 degrees Celsius. And here's the thing. You might say, I would love to, and this is my opinion, you might say, I love snow and stuff like that. You've never had to drive in snow before. Look, if you had snow around, it's like the most miserable thing. There's a reason why I don't live in a cold place. I mean, if this country was cold, I probably would not be there. Okay, that's the reality. But what I do believe, outside of my opinion, that warm weather is much better than cold weather, as long as you don't get to the level of the temperature of hell, is that I believe, during the wrath of God, based on these verses, I believe it's probably going to be colder than it normally is. Now, there could be a lot of other factors. I'm not saying there can't. But just based on those things, if the sun is not heating the earth, it's going to be very cold. Okay, turn to